This is the Beat Writers Roundtable inside TCO Studios. My name is Tatum Everett, and I know the timing seems funny that I brought you guys in here, but I swear it was just a coincidence. We have Ben Goessling from the Star Tribune, Kevin Seifert from ESPN.com, Alec from The Athletic, and the news that Kevin O'Connell just signed a multi-year contract extension here in Minnesota broke this week. So lucky to have you guys here. Ben, when you saw the news, what was your first thoughts?
Well, I think everybody figured it was going to happen sooner or later. It was obviously, he was coming up next year, and he's a coach that had increased his leverage quite a bit, increased his stock around the league quite a bit with the year that he had. He's going to be, I think, in the mix for Coach of the Year. We'll see if he wins that towards the end of this month. But obviously, the work he's done here and the way that players respond to him, the way he has worked with quarterbacks, made it obvious it was going to happen sooner or later. And the Wilfs were serious about it, talked with them a little bit in December, and they said, hey, we want to get this done pretty quickly after the season. And then it doesn't take very long for that to happen once the season is over.
Yeah, never any doubt, guys?
No, I don't think there was any doubt, but there were things that had to be worked through. I mean, these are complicated deals, and there's people's futures involved and a lot of money involved, obviously. And so there were some things that they had to work through and make sure that everybody was on the same page. They obviously did it very quickly. I think even last week when Kevin O'Connell was talking to us and he said he'd had dialogue with the Wilfs, I think I walked out of there feeling like whatever things needed to be smoothed over or polished or figured out that had already been done, and then they just needed to kind of get through the actual financial numbers. And so generally speaking, NFL teams are looking for coaches like Kevin O'Connell, people with quarterback expertise on the one hand, but also the ability in a larger sense to create a culture and get a team built and pushed in the right direction. And so those two things that he's demonstrated over the past 3 years that, all these other teams are looking for coaches, I mean, kind of that's what they want. And so it would have been really surprising if the Vikings didn't also value that.
And that's the thing for me, really. I mean, we could talk about the X's and O's on Sundays and the offensive design, and trust me, I love talking about that stuff as much as anybody, but I mean, it's the front-facing role. It's the vision in terms of scouting a quarterback like J.J. McCarthy. It's the relationship that he built with Justin Jefferson that I think played a role in Justin wanting to remain a Minnesota Viking. So there are just so many layers that really touch him when you peel back the curtain of this organization and of what they've accomplished over the last 3 years that land in some form or fashion on this desk. Like, you walk the hallways of this place, I think he is the obvious leader within this organization that you see publicly all the time. And so I don't think there is any coincidence that the way it feels is often a reflection of just how he's gone about it for 3 years.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head, and the success is in the record, right? 34-17 in 3 seasons is something that I think any NFL team would be pretty jealous of right now. A lot of what the success comes from is what you guys mentioned, the coaching staff and the ability to develop players. Kevin, I'll go to you first on this one. Who do you think on the roster this season made the biggest leap forward?
Obviously, Sam Darnold. I think we have to start there. You can think through lots of other players, and a lot of players improved. But when you look at where the conversation was around Sam Darnold at the start of the season, even after training camp, when some of us had a chance to see that he had a lot of potential there, he was basically considered a failure and one step away from his career potentially being over. Like, if he had come to Minnesota and had a similar experience to what he had in New York and Carolina, would there be a job waiting for him next season? I don't even know. So, let's recognize where it all started, and then you go through basically a 16 or 17 week period where he's playing at a Pro Bowl level. Like, he earned that Pro Bowl nod. There's people can argue about Pro Bowl and how all that works, but he was definitely one of the top 3 or 4 quarterbacks in the NFC this year. And so that was an incredible leap. We'll see where it takes him in the free agency and beyond. But to go from a place where he was probably down to his last chance, realistically, to being a Pro Bowler and somebody who's probably going to have multiple teams interested in him this offseason, we can't overlook that progress.
I remember training camp too. I mean, there were so many days where Sam was taking the majority of the first team reps, and I think there were questions even at the time of when's JJ going to take the first team reps? But a lot of that, you talk to people, and a lot of that was the coaching staff trying to figure out what Sam was best at, so that if they were to have to build the system around him, they could maximize his ability. So it was an intentional process, to Kevin's point, from the outset to put him in the optimal situation. So you have to start there. But I also think, I mean, to shift it a little bit, like the defense and hiring Brian Flores 2 years ago and what that's meant for this team, it's almost, you sit back and you think about what they've accomplished over 2 years with the personnel that they've had and just with how different the scheme has been at times. That's been just unbelievably impressive, and it's a testament to, after Kevin O'Connell's first year and where the defense was after that season, to what it has become. I think that's a big reflection, again, on just the foresight of what he wanted his defense to look like.
Yeah, I mean, the other name I'd throw in there, kind of to your point, Alec, would be Jonathan Grenard. I mean, both Jonathan Grenard and Andrew Van Ginkel, two guys that come in free agency, not thought to be terribly high-profile free agents. This is a team, obviously, that loses Daniil Hunter in the offseason, and there's kind of this question of how are they going to rebuild the pass rush. Grenard ends up, I think, second or third in the league in total pressures, plays the run well, takes on chippers, all of those kinds of things that you need from a pass rusher. Beyond just getting to the quarterback, he did at a Pro Bowl level, and Andrew Van Ginkel to come in with the nose to make the kinds of plays he does on the ball, and the pick sixes, and then the other ones where we see probably 3 or 4 more where he could have had the same thing happen. That level of intuition is a pretty rare thing. So to find those two guys at a relative bargain, I mean, it's a credit to the Vikings for finding them, but also for those guys for doing what they did to make the leaps that they did.
Well, you mentioned 3 of the names I'm probably going to need from you next in this next question, but they're 3 Pro Bowlers, 3 free agent signings. I mean, that just is very, very on the nose for Goessling, the general manager, and the front office and what they're able to do this offseason. In your mind, Ben, I'll go back to you on this one, and I may challenge you to expand or pick a different one, but who do you think is the most impactful free agent signing?
Well, I mean, you could talk about those two guys. I mean, Grenard and Van Ginkel, and Darnold's going to be the obvious in terms of a free agent signing from last year. I think the other one I would put in that conversation, it's late, but I would say Stephon Gilmore, in the sense that they needed a corner. I mean, we talk about whether it was Kyrie Jackson or Mekhi Blackman. Those are obviously 2 very different situations, but there was a major need at corner coming out of training camp. I think they've signed 5 or 6 guys in that defensive backfield in the course of the first few days of training camp. So it was not a secret that they needed to make a move there. And then Gilmore comes in to be able to be a number 1 corner, in the sense that he's shadowing guys across the field at times and basically plays every snap at his age. And that was a big impact. I don't know that they are going to be where they are without that type of a corner. And the fact that they did it when they did showed you how much they needed an upgrade there. So I would go with him in that conversation first.
Kind of funny you forget that he signed in the middle of training camp. He just assimilated so well.
Smart.
Yeah.
Didn't want to
pull the old Favre
all those July.
There you go. That's true. That's true.
It's a veteran move.
Yeah.
Another player that, to me, like in terms of just newcomers, Aaron Jones. People don't realize, and maybe it's partly because of 17 games, and he actually played all 17 games, which had been a hard thing for him in the past. But I mean, he career high in yards, career high in carries, career high in all-purpose yards. I mean, in a lot of it didn't feel that way because we were all watching the passing game and Sam Darnold, and totally get it. But like, this is one of the best years of his career at age 30. And we can talk about whether the run game, they got everything they could have gotten out of the run game this year, but they signed a free agent who the Packers didn't want to pay to stick around. And he produced almost 1,200 yards rushing, and really also was a really good pass blocker as well. And I don't know what the future holds for him. He's going to be in a year-to-year situation for the rest of his career. But we should take a moment to note, like, this was one of the best years he's ever had, and he's had a lot of good years.
Yeah.
The fact we've mentioned 5 guys, and I can come up with a different one in Blake Cashman.
Yeah.
We haven't talked about Blake Cashman's role as a linebacker in this defense, and there's no question. I mean, Jordan Hicks' departure after the 2023 year, he was a massive leader in the locker room. He played a ton of snaps. He battled back quickly from a really brutal injury, and it was just pretty obvious to be in the locker room to see his impact. So to move on from him and then sign a guy in Blake Cashman who, he performed in Houston for sure, and he's obviously a hometown guy, but for him to be as healthy as he was throughout the year to make the impact both in the passing game and against the run. I mean, he was a really good blitzer this year that really was important when Ivan Pace was out. But, I mean, it's just wild to think about as many guys as there were. And you could go down the line of guys on the interior of the defensive line, on like whether it's Jihad Ward or Jerry Tillery, guys who played these roles that became very impactful for a defense that, again, was, I mean, really like the bell cow of this team for a lot of the early part of this season.
It felt like a very true Brian Flores offense. He was able to put his mark on every position, and it fits his scheme so well. And that goes back to developing more players. And we've got a couple of rookies, first-year players that I want to ask you guys, and I'll start with you, Kevin. Who in your mind is the rookie or first-year player with the most potential?
I mean, I think all eyes are going to be on Dallas Turner next year, the year after, during the offseason. I mean, not only where he was drafted and the amount of draft picks that it took to get him, but just the potential, just the position he plays, the potential to impact the outcomes of games as a pass rusher. And so I think that he didn't play a lot this year. I think there was like 40-plus rookie defenders around the league that played more snaps. It's understandable when you have, as we talked about, two Pro Bowlers on the same side. I think that they probably are long-term thinking about him in terms of a lot of different positions that he could play. He's also one of the youngest people in the draft at age 21, and so I know he kind of looked at this as a get used to being in the NFL type year. I know some fans, a lot of fans and media would have liked to seen more of him, and I'm sure we will at some point. But like in terms of what we saw from him in college, the amount of draft capital it took to get him, and the positions that he'll play, I think like that's where a lot of eyes will be on for the foreseeable future.
You guys agree?
Yeah, I mean, go ahead. There's another obvious name.
The name that I wanted to give is, and it's a very probably traditional. You guys know, I love kind of the undrafted guys, the maybe unheralded guys, and there was part of me that wanted to go Taki Taimani, but I will go Dwight McGlothern. I was impressed by him throughout the entire training camp. I remember the joint practices in Cleveland. I thought he was very impressive there. And then he played at the very end of the game against the Bears late in the season. I mean, he's matched up one-on-one off coverage against Keenan Allen and just holding his own in that situation. And so for me, I look at the cornerback room moving forward. Stephon Gilmore, Shaq Griffin, and Byron Murphy Jr. are supposed to be free agents. That is a position group I think we're probably going to talk about over the next few months. And I think it'll be interesting to see whether Dwight factors into that mix. Mm-hmm. So that's me doing what I do, going with guys that probably.
You also left the obvious one to Ben. So
there you go.
Step
yeah,
right
Ben,
up.
take it away.
So I will give an obvious and a non-obvious.
Okay.
The obvious is J.J. McCarthy, of course. In terms of that's the future of the franchise, right? We don't need to belabor that point very much. We'll see if it's next year. We'll see if it's a year after that. But certainly everything, the eyes are going to be on him. The stake of a lot of reputations on that pick are going to be on him. The other one that comes to my mind is Michael Juergens. He's a guy that if you go forward thinking about what could the center position look like in a couple of years, he may be a future center. And if he is the guy long term, maybe it's him and J.J. McCarthy working together for quite a while in the future. That's a little more probably down the road. We'll see what happens with Garrett Bradbury beyond. It is a deep cut.
Hey, shoot your shot. Yeah, right?
Dwight McGlothern, we got
Michael Juergens. There's a lot of potential. Yeah. We talk about how many free agents were. There is a lot of potential on this team as well. And you're looking for that potential throughout the offseason, through the draft, et cetera, et cetera. So let's get to the areas of need. Where do you think Alec would be the number one place to target for this Vikings front office this offseason?
The interior of the offensive line would be the answer that I provide you. I've covered the team. This is my third season, and I mean, it really just it affects everything. It's pass protection, obviously. That's what we notice the most. But it's run game. It's run game versatility. It's I mean, you always hear about the offensive line being a system, a unit, and the weakest parts of that unit, I think, are integral to be at a floor that gives the entire unit a chance to be really, really good. I think it's going to be interesting, too, as we mentioned J.J. McCarthy and where they may go at quarterback. I mean, to have that infrastructure up front for a guy like that would be, I mean, it's integral. And so, I mean, I don't need to tell the people watching this or explain to them what they've seen, I think, over the last decade or so at times at that position. That's just the obvious one. Kevin O'Connell mentioned it after the final game in Arizona against the Rams. And I mentioned talking about certain positions over the next few months. That will be one that if I had $1 for every time I wrote it in a story, it would probably be beneficial for me.
Well, I mean, to me, like, organizational need is to find out about J.J. McCarthy, and it's kind of amazing that we went through as long as we did without, without getting to him, because it's the number one priority in the entire building, I'm sure. And so, and there's no reason to doubt him, but it's like, he didn't get to practice at all this year. He was obviously hurt. And so he had to do everything off to the side and go to meetings. But there's a lot of catch up to do there. Plenty of time to do it before there's really any OTAs or any time where he has to be on the field. But teams draft quarterbacks to play now. And so there's a handful of people that wait for a few years. He was like Dallas Turner. He was also one of the youngest quarterbacks out there. So it's I think he's still a year younger than most of the guys that are in the draft this year, the Cam Wards and the Shedeur Sanders and those guys. So he's like from a body standpoint, he's still got a long way to go. But like I think these next few months and maybe heading right into training camp are going to be pretty critical in terms of deciding, like, is it time? Is he ready to take over as the starter? Do they need to plan for him to have another quote-unquote redshirt year? Who do they need to have here with him? I mean, all those things, the dominoes will fall. How much money is it going to cost to do those things? Like the rest of the dominoes in terms of replacing cornerbacks or, signing a new running back or bringing Aaron Jones back or interior offensive line, all that stuff is going to kind of filter down from their assessment of JJ and what he needs around him.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of needs, corner would be the other one I would bring up because, I mean, Alec mentioned it, the number of free agents, and you have guys coming back from injury like Mekhi Blackman, Dwight McGlothern could be part of this mix, but do they need a long-term answer at that position? It could be Byron Murphy, could be back as a free agent, had one of his best years in the league this season, but you have to figure out, is he part of the long-term picture? Is there a need for help in the draft? I mean, that's been, Mike Zimmer always used to talk about the right answer to the number of corners you need is just one more. And there's a lot of truth to that because you do see whether it's injuries or it gets expensive, that is a position you kind of need to continually refresh and restock. So I think that, whether you're in a good spot or not, that's always a need. And certainly when you look at the free agent picture, that's going to be one of those things they have to consider as well, I think.
It's going to be another exciting offseason. I have a feeling there's going to be a lot going on.
Yeah. Another busy offseason.
Another busy offseason. This season, though, was truly special. I thought it was one of the more fun seasons to cover. 14 wins. You had those massive win streaks throughout. Kevin, you've covered this team for an incredibly long time. Not to date you or anything.
My hair wasn't gray when
Not
I
to date you or
started, put it that
anything.
way.
But you've been around this team for a while, and
I used to take a horse to
went
to
in the
training
snow
camp
up to the hill both ways, right?
Rode in a carriage.
How would you describe covering this team in particular?
This year was a lot of fun, and I think it speaks to sort of the impact of external expectations. I know all teams say, we don't care what people say and think about us, and all that, but like there was zero external expectations for this team. There was zero attention on this team when training camp started, when the season started, and so they could just go out and play. And they were, they were a very loose team. I can't say for sure it was because no one thought they were going to be any good and they just could go out and play. But I've covered teams that did have that pressure, and it's like everybody's tight and tense, and like if you lose one game, then all of a sudden, or one bad play or an injury happens, then all of a sudden you're not going to meet expectations. And like this team, by winning its first game, first two games had exceeded expectations already, and so they were very loose. Kevin O'Connell was very loose. Sam Darnold got very loose on his scale as the season progressed. The locker room was really like a fun place to be because they were doing so well. There was very little conflict or tension, and I'm not saying like I don't know all the things that happened behind closed doors, but I think that it feels safe to say that this was they were having fun behind closed doors, and also when we were around, and so. You don't get those kind of years every year. Like there's all kinds of things that can go wrong during the course of an NFL season that makes it I don't say a drag, but like more tense to cover. Like the work environment is not that interesting. And like I always say, like, covering football, we're not curing cancer. We're not, trying to solve the issue of homelessness in the world. Like we're just covering football, and to spend the amount of time we do doing it, it needs to be fun. And this year very much was fun.
That's awesome. Ben, I know you've been in this locker room for some time too. What did you think?
Yeah, I mean, this is my 13th season doing it. So this one sticks out in a lot of ways for me as well. I think unexpected success seasons are always, whether you're a fan base or a writer covering a team, they have a unique flavor to them, and this one certainly had a lot of that. It reminded me a little bit of probably 2015, 2017, maybe even 2012. Those are the ones that stick out to me as like, there were not big expectations for this team, and then they come out, and whether they win a division or go to the playoffs, they exceed a lot of those things. I think that always makes for a pretty lively environment to cover. I mean, a lot of the things you're covering are positive surprises, so that certainly changes the feel of everything as well, like Kevin said. But it did have a lot of that feel all season, and then you bring in a lot of guys who liked to talk football, that liked to kind of peel back the layers of what's going on and realized if you do it, you can still win a lot of games. It's not going to sink a team to say, hey, here's what we were trying to do on this particular play. So you had a lot of guys in that locker room that are smart football people that just like to talk about the game. So that makes it a lot of fun to cover as well.
It makes a huge difference.
Yeah, it was. I mean, it was a blast. I think the thing for me too is like, as much fun as it did feel, there was also this layer of like, at least to me, it felt like they were doing it a little bit for something bigger, and I think that obviously just goes back to what happened over the summer with Kyrie Jackson, and there were so many newcomers who had gotten to know him, and I think. I mean, you just listened to both, I mean, people inside the locker room and people around his family talk about how much they felt like that they just had to rely on each other, and it had to bring them together in some way as they grieved that situation. So it was, and there was an awareness from the guys internally that they were doing it for something bigger. And that's always, I don't know, you appreciate that maybe, or at least I did in that throughout the season. But the camaraderie of the group, I just won't forget. Like there were times where it just felt in the locker room during the days that we're in there for X amount of time, like it was just like a high school team of buddies that had been together for a while. And I mean, these guys would know way more than I would given their experience level, but I don't think that's always the case with the group of pros.
Yeah, no, it was definitely a really, really fun experience to be around that group. They accomplished so much, made our jobs a lot easier and more fun, I could say, or you could say at least. But thank you so much for joining us for this Beat Writers Roundtable. It's a series that we're hoping to continue throughout this offseason as more and more news comes in about what happens with this Vikings team as we head into the 2025 season. It's crazy to say, you guys. Thank you so much, Alec, Kevin, and Ben. You guys rock. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.